Does life have any meaning? I have heard it said throughout my life that life is meaningless. I do not think that this is the case. Those who claim that life has no meaning do not appeal to me because they are wrong. They assume falsely that meaning is tantamount to permanency. Why should something be meaningless if it is short lived? Why should something be meaningful if it were permanent? Is a conversation meaningless because it is evanescent? Is a meal meaningless because it is ephemeral? Why should it be? Why should meaning be equated to permanency? I know well that we are all hurtling toward death and toward oblivion. When I say oblivion, I mean forgottenness, not nothingness, not nullity, into the great naught with you, into the great naught with us all. Naught is spelled here Nought. Everyone is indeed hurtling toward the abyss of forgottenness, but that does not mean that life is meaningless. Quite the contrary. Life is meaningful. Life is meaningful because it is meaningful to me. Life is not meaningless, for it has meaning for me, even though I know that my consciousness will only last and live for a short time. It does not matter whether we are remembered after our death or whether our consciousness will persist in the charnel house and the house of death. What matters is what I think about myself right now at this very moment. Meaning is too often wrongly identified with permanency, but Nietzsche has another idea. Nothing lasts forever, according to Nietzsche, but everything recurs. Meaning is intensification and intermittence. The doctrine of the eternal recurrence of the same, die ewige Wiederkehr des Gleichen, is the name for Nietzsche's thought, and its meaning is double. It is ambiguous. On the one hand, it is the Nietzschean maxim of conduct. It is a way of thinking about our lives and a way of conducting ourselves in our lives. On the other hand, it is a theory of history. To turn to the first meaning of the eternal recurrence of the same, the eternal recurrence of the same is Nietzsche's categorical imperative. Kant writes, act only according to that maxim through which you can at the same time will that your maxim should become an eternal law. We don't have time right now to discuss the Kantian categorical imperative. We only have time to discuss the Nietzschean categorical imperative, which is, in my own words, act as though everything that you do will have been repeated eternally. This is a brilliant and beautiful way of living. Every moment of one's life becomes meaningful, even though it is ephemeral. Act as though every moment of your life will have been repeated eternally, but our lives will not be repeated eternally. Act as though yours will have been nonetheless. The doctrine of the eternal recurrence of the same emerges from the crater chasm left by the death of God. After the death of God, the human beast does not know which way to turn. We don't know which way to turn anymore. Nihilism results from the death of God. The meaning of life came from God in the before times. Now we have shifted into the nihilistic epoch since God died. This means an age in which divine supervision and celestial instruction is no longer supported by the culture in which we live. Without belief in God, we no longer have a goal. Out of nihilism comes a different belief, and that is the belief in the eternal recurrence of the same, die ewige Wiederkehr des Gleichen. Again, this is Nietzsche's categorical imperative. Live as though every moment will return again and again and again and again. The doctrine of the eternal recurrence of the same is not belief in personal immortality. No, it is a way in which to overcome nihilism. It is a way in which to make one's own finite existence meaningful, as though every moment carried an eternity. As though every moment carried an eternity-imbued significance, which it does not, in fact, have. I'm going to be citing a passage from Nietzsche. On to the second meaning of the eternal recurrence of the same. This is from the unpublished fragments of Nietzsche. I don't know if you can see that. The doctrine of the eternal recurrence of the same is also a theory of history. Please allow me to read a passage from one of Nietzsche's unpublished notebooks written between April 1885 and June 1885. This is on page 60 of the English translation. And then what I'll do is I will read the German. My friends, what has occupied me for so many years? I have endeavored to think pessimism to the depths and to free it from the half-Christian, half-German narrow-mindedness and simplicity in which it first appeared to me in the philosophy of Schopenhauer. So that the human being of this way of thinking is also equal, so that the human being of this way of thinking is also equal to the highest expression of pessimism. I likewise sought an opposite ideal, a way of thinking that is the most exuberant, lively, and world-affirming of all possible ways of thinking. I found it in the thinking of the mechanistic worldview to the end. It truly takes the very best humor in the world to tolerate such a world of eternal recurrence as I have taught through my son, Zarathustra. Here we ourselves included in an eternal da capo. Da capo means from the beginning, from the start. In the end, I decided that for me, the most world-denying of all possible ways of thinking is the one that denounces becoming, originating and passing away as bad in themselves, and that affirms only the unconditional, the one, the certain being. I found that God is the most annihilating and life inimical of all thoughts, and that the knowledge of this truth, in quotation marks, has had to wait so long due only to the tremendous obscurity of the good old pious ones and metaphysicians of all ages. So that was from the English translation. I want to read from the German now. One moment. So this is the German. Meine Freunde, womit bin ich doch seit vielen Jahren beschäftigt? Ich habe mich bemüht, den Pessimismus in die Tiefe zu denken und aus der halbchristlichen, halbdeutschen Enge und Einfalt zu erlösen, in der mir in der Philosophie Schopenhauers zuerst entgegentrat, sodass der Mensch diese Denkweise auch dem höchsten Ausdruck des Pessimismus gewachsen ist. Ich habe insgleichen ein umgekehrtes Ideal gesucht, eine Denkweise, welche die übermütigste, lebendigste und weltbejahendste aller möglichen Denkweisen ist. Ich fand sie im Zu-Ende-Denken der mechanistischen Weltbetrachtung. Es gehört wahrlich der allerbeste Humor von der Welt dazu, um eine solche Welt der ewigen Wiederkunft, wie ich sie durch meinen Sohn Zarathustra gelehrt habe, also uns selber in ewigem Da Capo mitbegriffen, auszuhalten. Schließlich ergab sich für mich, dass die weltverneinendste aller möglichen Denkensarten die ist, welche das Werden, Entstehen und Vergehen an sich schon schlecht heißt und welche nur das Unbedingte, eine gewisse Seiende bejaht. Ich fand, dass Gott der vernichtendste und lebensfeindlichste aller Gedanken ist und das nur durch die ungeheuerliche Unklarheit der lieben Frommen und Metaphysiker aller Zeiten die Erkenntnis dieser Wahrheit so lange hat auf sich warten lassen. So to comment on this passage, the dogmatizers want to fix being, like fix it, like make it fixed, make it stable. They want to fossilize being. They want to freeze being. They want to petrify the whole of being. They hold on to being in opposition to the flow of becoming. They would set fixed markers for the beginning of the world and for the ending of the world. Thus, they believe in stasis, right? Whereas Nietzsche believes in kinesis, fluctuousness. No moment is appropriable, right? Every moment glides away, slides away from us into the flux of becoming. And then that moment returns whether we want it to or not. And then that moment returns whether we want it to or not. For Nietzsche, all is flux, and only the flux controls the flux. So according to Nietzsche, there is no being, there is only becoming. The becoming of the eternal recurrence of the same, which is to say there is no significance behind or beyond the world. There is no inapprehensible and unsensory foundation behind or beyond the world. Significance is only accrued through the intensification of temporality. So Nietzsche does wish to eternalize existence, which is ephemeral, but this is not the Christian belief in the immortality of the soul. It is the antipode of the Christian belief in the immortality of the soul. The will to self-eternalization would be megalomaniacal, far worse than narcissism. No, cosmic repetition is indifferent to the human will. Cosmic repetition is indifferent to the human will. If we experience the essence of the doctrine that all things recur, we live in the prospect of our future recurrence, but we have no say in the matter. A pessimist is someone who would say, oh no, life is brief, life is too short. Life is so short. A Nietzschean free spirit, a libertist and antinomian, would say by contrast, every instant of your life will happen evermore, whether you want it to or not. And the next time it happens, the next event will be a simulation. Just in the same way that the first event was a simulation without an original, a replica without a model. A replica without a model. Chiliastic messianic thinking would posit an end to history, or indeed the end of history. Chiliasts believe that there is a progression toward a goal, but progression and regression are one and the same, according to the Nietzschean model. There is no goal at the end of time. Time is interminable and ever folding backward. The goal is nothing more than a node in an infinite sequence. So, there is no eschatology, there is no apocalypse. The apocalypse implies the post-apocalyptic. Whenever you posit the end, you are implying the after end. While there might be the appearance of the apocalypse is merely an apocalypse. Every generation has its own apocalypse, and every apocalypse is retrocessive and proleptic. Apocalypse now and forever. Whenever you mark an origin or a conclusion, a beginning or an ending, you are implying a provisional way station along the way. There will always be an infinite series of moments before each origin, in quotation marks, and an infinite series of moments after each ending, in quotation marks. Every move forward retrocedes. Now, Nietzsche was a scientific dilettante, but he does attempt to scientize his theory of the eternal recurrence of the same, as you will see in the following passage. So this is from writings from the late notebooks, Cambridge University Press, if you want to see the English. And this is on page 112. It's quite simple. The principle of the conservation of energy demands eternal recurrence. Now let me read the German. So this is the German right here. See it? The German. And let me show you the title page in case you're interested. Can you see that? Okay. So this is the German original. Der Satz von bestehender Energie fordert die ewige Wiederkehr. Okay. All right, so let's move on now. What does all of this mean? This is Nietzsche attempting to scientize the doctrine of the eternal recurrence of the same. Most of you will be familiar with the scientific law of the conservation of energy. First formulated by Amélie du Châtelet, energy can neither be created nor destroyed, right? That means energy can only be transmuted. Energy can only be transformed. Energy can only be transferred from one form to another, right? So Nietzsche applies the scientific law of the conservation of energy to his theory of the eternal recurrence of the same. The world is finite. It has a finite set of resources. These same resources endlessly permute themselves into new arrangements. So the world is a series of infinite permutations of the same fixed elements. So the world is a series of infinite permutations of the same fixed elements. In other words, the world is finite, but time is eternal. The world has no goal other than its own infinite repetition. The world has no goal other than the infinite self-transformation of the same fixed set of resources, right? Let me also add that a supercomputer could accurately predict the futurity of the world, since human behavior is predictable. Why is this? Because each event is in prospect of its own repetition. Now, let's talk about guilt for a moment. Let's discuss guilt. Many of you will already be familiar with Kafka's The Trial, Der Prozess. which suggests that its main character, Joseph K, is guilty, of course. His entire existence is guilty. And by extension, the whole of human existence is guilty. The crime of Joseph K is unnamed in the text because it is unnameable. The whole of existence is ridden with guilt, which doesn't mean the feeling of guilt. It means actual guiltiness, right? Nietzsche, by contrast, is relieving life of its heaviness, alleviating existence of its heaviness, of all of its gravitas. Existence is not heavy at all, according to Nietzsche. How could it be if everything returns again and again to the point of ridiculousness? No, life is not heavy. It is a free play of masks. It seems heavy to those who believe that life has some transcendent significance, that we are being supervised by supernatural forces. The belief in the eternal recurrence of the same liberates life of its heaviness. It is an affirmative belief, one which affirms that life is liberated and liberating. Now, I'm going to quote another passage for you in just a moment. So this is also from the late notebooks, and in particular, this is from Notebook 7, which was written in between the end of 1886 and spring 1887. In the Cambridge University Press translation, this is from page 135 to 136. So anyway, the first question is by no means whether we are satisfied with ourselves, but whether we are satisfied with anything at all. If we say yes to a single moment, this means we have said yes, not only to ourselves, but to all existence. For nothing stands alone, either in us, ourselves, or in things. And if just once our soul has quivered and resounded with happiness, like a harp string, then all eternity was needed to condition that one event. And in that one moment of our saying yes, all eternity was welcomed, redeemed, justified, and affirmed. Now let me quote the German for my Germanophonic listeners, auditors, spectators. So let me read the original. Es ist ganz und gar nicht die erste Frage, ob wir mit uns zufrieden sind, sondern ob wir überhaupt irgendwo mit zufrieden sind. Gesetzt, wir sagen ja zu einem einzigen Augenblick, so haben wir damit nicht nur zu uns selbst, sondern zu allem Dasein ja gesagt. Denn es steht nichts für sich, weder in uns selbst noch in den Dingen. Und wenn nur ein einziges Mal unsere Seele wie eine Saite vor Glück gezittert und getönt hat, so waren alle Ewigkeiten nötig, um dies eine Geschehen zu bedingen. Und alle Ewigkeit war in diesem einzigen Augenblick unseres Ja-Sagens gut geheißen, erlöst, gerechtfertigt und bejaht. So, there it is again. If you're interested. I don't know if you can see that. So to return, life is not a tragedy. It is a farce. It is a farcical playing with masks, a giddy masquerade. It is silliness. It is weightlessness. The experience of the eternal recurrence of the same is not the unbearable lightness of being, but the unborn bliss of becoming. The unborn bliss of becoming, when I say unborn, that would be spelled Unborne. Now, the time of the eternal recurrence of the same is a time in which the category of presence is suspended. Whatever has happened will have happened again. This means that every now is an already was and a will have been at the same time. That is to say, there is no present moment. Each present moment is a mode of possibility. Each present moment is a mode of possibility. The eternal recurrence of the same is the great circle, and it takes a child to recognize that all of time is a circle. The child is the highest stage of the human spirit. The child is the terminal stage of human consciousness. The child is the stage at which the human beast says with conviction, I am, and I accept all that is. I accept the innocence of becoming, which is the fact, in quotation marks, that everything will happen once more. Everything will have happened once more, and so on for all of eternity. Humankind is merely one circle within the great circle. Noontime is the time at which humankind recognizes that everything has already happened and everything will have happened again. The moment at which we recognize that all things will have happened, and the moment at which we recognize that all things will have recurred, will itself be re-experienced. This means that we will eventually forget that all things will have recurred. We will experience the eternal recurrence of the same again and again and again, and we will forget the experience of the eternal recurrence of the same again and again and again and again. Thank you very much. My name is Joseph Suglia, Suglia, and this is one of my many lectures on Nietzsche, but I think it's more than that. Thank you very much.